The Rangers' season hasn't gone exactly as they'd hope, but it also hasn't been as bad as they feared. On today's show, I'm breaking down where this team stands, 3 things that have gone right and wrong at this point in the season. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into the 3 things that have gone right and wrong for this Rangers team so far, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, the Rangers are sitting here 45 games into the season, a little over a quarter of the way through, not quite a third of the way through, on an off day, heading into a pretty big weekend series against a very bad Angels team that hopefully can help the Rangers get back on track. Because this season hasn't quite started as good as the Rangers were hoping that it would, nearly a third of the way into it. The Rangers knew the season was going to be into a rough start. They knew they were going to be without 3 of their best starting pitchers for most, if not all, of the season in Max Scherzer, Tyler Mahle, Jacob deGrom. There was some false hope about Scherzer returning quicker than being placed, quick enough to not be placed on the 60-day IL off the jump, but alas, that has not happened yet. But they're still in an all right place. They still have a winning record. They still haven't had a losing record at all under Bruce Bochy. They're a game and a half out of the AL West, and they're 2 games back of the wild card. So let's look at the 3 things that have gone right for this team to start off this show. Number 1, the biggest thing I think that has gone right for this team has been the back end of the bullpens, specifically the Kirby Yates, David Robertson combination. Those 2 have been absolutely everything the Rangers could have possibly hoped from those 2 guys when they signed him. Really, they have been the biggest additions to this team, and it has not been particularly close. Kirby Yates was thrust into the closer role about a week into the season after the Rangers just did not get what they hoped out of Jose Leclerc. Leclerc hasn't been a total disaster as much as his numbers look like it. He hasn't been reliable. He hasn't been World Series version of himself. He hasn't been the playoff version of himself, but he hasn't been good enough to be the closer on this team because Kirby Yates took that role and absolutely ran with it. He's pitched in 16 games so far this season. He's got 20 strikeouts in 17 and a third innings. He's not walking very many. He's not allowing barely any hits, and he's not allowing barely any runs. He hasn't blown a save. He hasn't lost a game either. He hasn't blown a tied game. The only runs that he's allowed have been in, well, one of them was a save situation, and that was the first one after, what I believe, 14 games it took him till he actually allowed a run because he had been so incredibly good. And Robertson has been incredibly good for the Rangers coming in. And not only are these guys coming in save situations in the 8th and the 9th inning, sometimes they're coming in the 7th. A lot of times they're giving you more than 1 inning per outing. Right now, Kirby Yates has thrown 17 and a third innings in just 16 games. David Robertson has pitched in 19 games, and he's thrown 21 and 2/3 innings. So these guys are going in there. They're giving you sometimes 2 innings, sometimes an inning and a third, and they have been incredibly reliable. Oh, and by the way, even though they're old and were thought to be mostly washed up, they have been just as good as they've ever been at this point in their careers. I mean, Kirby Yates has been such a great find. He's a big reason why the Rangers have been able to win these close games that they couldn't do last year. The Rangers had been absolutely terrible in one-run games and in extra inning games over the last couple of years because the bullpen has been awful. And then it wasn't in October, thankfully. But outside of October, the last 3 years, basically, this Rangers team has not been able to win one-run and extra inning games. But so far this year in one-run games, they are 7-4, which doesn't sound amazing, but for where this team was, it's absolutely incredible. And in extra inning games, they've only played in 2 of those, but they are 2-0. That's huge. Right now, that's the difference between being 500 and being under 500. Small margins, but they make big, big differences. Being able to count on those guys has been so important for this Rangers squad. And even though they've also gotten some surprises in the back end, the bullpen, Jacob Latz has been much better than I expected. Spores, when he's been healthy, has been very good. Hernandez has had some shaky outings, and the back end of this bullpen, the B side, has come and gone in terms of its effectiveness. But Yates and Robertson have been so darn good. It has been just a breath of fresh air to go into the 8th and the 9th inning with a lead and not be hanging on for dear life, because that was not a fun experience these last couple of years. The number 2 thing that has gone right for this team has been the rotation. It was not something that was expected to go right. It was expected, especially at the beginning of this year, it was expected to be one of the worst in baseball. It was expected to be a real issue for this team. And it's been their savior so far. The offense has come and gone. It's scored runs inconsistently, but it has scored runs. But this starting rotation has been downright awesome. Starting with John Gray, who's got a 2.08 ERA in 52 innings this year. Nate Eovaldi, before he got hurt, he had a sub-3 ERA. He was looking fantastic. Cody Bradford, before he got hurt, looked absolutely phenomenal. And since a rough couple of starts for Andrew Heaney and Dane Dunning, both those guys have been solid. Again, Dunning before he got hurt. But Heaney and Gray holding down this rotation while these other guys are hurt, which we'll get to the injuries as something that clearly has not gone right for the Rangers. But Gray and Heaney and even Urania, now that he's been thrust into the starting rotation with all of these injuries, all those 3 guys have been so reliable, so huge for this team, and Lorenzen as well has been very, very helpful for this rotation. I thought it didn't really make sense to me of signing him, a day before opening day or on opening day, whenever it was, not very long before the season started. The Rangers didn't get him into the rotation until they went to Detroit, but he has been incredibly helpful for this rotation too, because if not for him, then we would have had a lot of Owen White starts, and we saw what Jack Leiter's starts were, and I think Leiter's pretty comfortably much better than Owen White. This team could have been in an even rougher place if not for the 6 starts that Michael Lorenzen has delivered this team. But they're not in a terrible spot. They're not in a horrible spot. And this rotation has been such a gift. And it'll get to the point where if all of these injured starting pitchers, the 6 that are on the IL, get back, they're going to have some really, really tough decisions to make of who goes to the bullpen and who stays in this rotation, because everybody who's in it right now has been plenty good enough to stay in the rotation, but that will hopefully make this team even better, especially as this offense starts to heat up. Now, the number 3 thing that's gone right for this team so far this season has got to be Josh Smith. His emergence has been huge for this team with Josh Young's injury. The Rangers weren't sure how much they were going to play Josh Smith or Ezekiel Duran, but both those guys played an integral role for this team last year when they had an all-star on the left side of their infield hurt for a significant portion of the early season. So far, it's been Josh Smith that has stepped up this year, not as much Ezekiel Duran, but Duran is definitely on the upswing in terms of his offensive production. But Josh Smith has been one of the best hitters in this lineup at this point in the season. He's got the highest OPS plus of anybody who's played more than 25 games. Made that cutoff for Nathaniel Lowe, because Lowe has been pretty darn good for this offense since he got back. Thankfully, that has been a huge gift to this team, and I think he's going to stay as the Rangers' 3-hole hitter, which should help provide some consistency that they didn't really have last year. Lowe not being his full Nathaniel Lowe self offensively last year, I think It's surprising how good this offense was able to be with him as their 3-hole hitter for most of the season when he wasn't having his best season, and they had so much depth around him. But Lowe has been very good this season. It's been a slow start for Seager and a little bit for Heim, and at times for some of the rookies down in this lineup. But Josh Smith has been huge for this team, and even if he doesn't keep up this level of production, Josh Young is hopefully going to be back soon, but just having this level of production right now when the Rangers needed it most has been such a huge thing that has gone right for this Rangers team. Coming up, we're talking about what has gone wrong for this team, and then look at a big picture view of where they are 45 games into the season. Right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get an expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from everywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. Now, you may be a glass half empty kind of person. If you are, you've been yelling at me this entire podcast saying, Bryce, why are you pumping sunshine? This team is not good enough. This is not the team that I signed up for. This is not what the reigning World Series champion should look like. And if that's you, then this next segment will be absolutely up your alley. What has gone wrong for this team? My God, the injuries. I've probably spent half of this show for the last 3 months just saying who's hurt now, how badly are they hurt, are they coming back, is there some new setback, because it's just been so overwhelming, the amount of injuries, the amount of injury time lost this team already has and will continue to have, because some of these guys aren't coming back quickly. The Rangers have, I believe, 13 guys on the IL right now in some capacity. Hopefully, some are coming back sooner as opposed to later. Hopefully, most of them are coming back sooner as opposed to later. But at this point, the Rangers have a combined 5 Cy Youngs on the IL. They have a combined, I believe, if my math is correct, 14, maybe 15 All-Star appearances on the IL. And a combined, where'd we go? I did this math on purpose. 159.6 Baseball Reference WAR cumulatively on the IL. 159.6. That's like 2 Max Scherzers. Max Scherzer has 75 of that 154, but that's still a lot of WAR, a lot of good players that are on the IL, and the Rangers have done their best with depth to kind of, survive, because that was the entire memo of the season, is just survive until the guys on the shelf get back and start to reinforce this team. Don't get yourself in too big of a hole. Don't fall way underwater. Don't just stink it up real bad for the first couple months of the season, because help is on the way. Just like Robin Williams said, help is on the way, dear. It is. It just is. And then more guys will get hurt. And the Rangers really needed their rotation to be very healthy for the first couple months of the season. Until June, I was like, all right, nobody get hurt. Everyone just stay where you are. Be fine. Nobody else get hurt. And then what'd they do? They got hurt. Now, that wasn't an intentional choice, but 3 starting pitchers going on the IL before they get any of the big guns back of Scherzer, DeGrom, and Mahle, even with Scherzer looking like he was going to come back earlier. But no, they have an injury to Eovaldi. They have an injury to Cody Bradford. And then right when you think, okay, that's enough with these injuries, Dane Dunning, boom, on the IL, 15 days gone. It's like, my God, can this team get any luck? And not to mention Joshua Ryan Young, reigning all-star, reigning World Series champ, going down after 4 games this season. And in those 4 games, he was an absolute world beater to the point where he's still in the top 12 baseball reference war on this team, and he played 4 games. He's still there because he was that good. Oh, by the way, Cody Bradford, who only started in 3 games, he's also in the top 12 baseball reference, right? 8th. Cody Bradford, who made 3 starts, is the 8th most valuable player on this team, 45 games into the season, and he only started 3 of those games. That's how good Bradford was. That's how good Josh Young was. And they have just survived. I mean, it's not even the guys that have been on the IL. It's in the quality of them. I mean, that's obviously a big part of it, but it's also the guys who have been coming back from injury and who have been a little hampered and not quite their full selves. I mean, Corey Seager clearly wasn't himself for the first month of the season. Heck, until the last week and a half, he hasn't looked anywhere close to his full self. But really, since that series in Oakland, since that big 3-run homer, I feel like he has looked a lot more like himself, hitting balls hard. He still isn't getting them to fall. The overall numbers aren't great, but still, he hasn't been the fullest version of himself. They also missed quite a few games from Nathaniel Lowe, and Evan Carter has been dealing with an injury. He hasn't gone on the IL. They also had Wyatt Langford, who just was not great before he came up, also land on the IL. We'll see when they get him back, but just surviving this sheer amount of overwhelming injuries has been very impressive that they've been able to do it. And thankfully, we'll get to more of a big picture look. The AL West hasn't really passed them by. I mean, we know what's happening with the Astros, and it's not great. The Mariners haven't been amazing. They're still in first place, but the Rangers have done enough. But the number 2 thing that hasn't gone right for this team so far is the bullpen depth on the B side specifically. Leclerc has not been great this season. He just hasn't been. It's why he's not the closer. It's why he is only really getting lower leverage situations. He's not even the 8th inning guy. And I thought he was going to be the closer for a decent chunk of this year. Well, that hasn't happened. He has really struggled with the walks and the hit by pitches. 7.6 walks per 9 for Jose Leclerc and an ERA over 6.5. The FIP is significantly better at 4.13. So he's not allowing the home runs, but the walks, the strikeouts have been amazing for him, but the walks, just, my goodness, Jose. Throwing the ball in the strike zone. I know it moves a lot, but just hit the strike zone a little bit more often. And then some of the guys on the back end that you're not really sure how much they're going to be pitching down the stretch this season. The Yeri Rodriguez's, the John Hernandez's, the Grant Andersons, heck, even Brock Burke. I mean, those guys have not been great this year. I mean, almost all of those guys have an ERA. Well, outside of Hernandez, who had that one disastrous appearance that I think will end up skewing a lot of his numbers, especially with the walks and the walks per 9. I mean, he would throw 5 walks and you don't get, I don't think he got anybody out. He might have gotten 1 out in that appearance in Oakland where he was clearly just going through it from that first pitch. But the rest of those guys, Anderson's got an ERA of nearly 12, as does Austin Pruitt, it's 12.5, and then Brock Burke's got a 15 ERA in his 5 games where he hasn't pitched in a while. He's finally on a rehab assignment. It's one of the weirder things that happened this season that we haven't really talked anything about, of Brock Burke just punching the wall and being out for 2 months. It's going to be that's just another weird injury turn this Rangers team had, but he wasn't nearly his 2022 version of himself, or even last year's version of himself. So the Rangers haven't really missed him that much, but the B side has been inconsistent. Latz has had some lapses lately. Hernandez has had a huge issue with the walks. Yeri Rodriguez has had an amazing appearance in his last game where he threw 4 perfect innings in relief of Jack Leiter, who was not great. He's also, I think, has not gone right for this team. But it's been the inconsistency. Sometimes you get those great performances. Sometimes you get the absolute stinkers. And that's why predicting bullpens is an impossible task. Now, the number 3 thing that has not gone right for this team so far has been the youngsters. A trio of rookies with all the hype in the world that just have not quite gotten it going yet. Jack Leiter is one of those rookies, and we have talked ad nauseum about Jack and him just being thrust into a role that he wasn't ready for because the Rangers had a crap ton of injuries, and that's not Jack's fault, but it is something that he has struggled to step up and take a rotation spot. He could have had a rotation spot for a couple weeks if he had come out in that first performance and been amazing. But he wasn't ready yet. And so the Rangers sent him back down, and I don't think he will be getting a start at the major league level, maybe even for the rest of this year. Depends on the health of this rotation, but I wouldn't be surprised if Leiter's next major league start comes in 2025. But it's also been a rough start for Evan Carter. He's had a lot of issues with hitting lefties. He's had a lot of issues with the swing and miss. And, he's just not been anywhere near what he was last year, which, again, expecting him to come in and have a, 1,000 OPS in his first major league season, that's insane. That would be an insane expectation. Evan Carter's run through the postseason and through the end of last season was amazing and spectacular, but expecting him to do it again for a full season of the 21-year-old, that was a bit much to ask. And he's been out for the last 6 games. Hopefully he comes back into lineup tonight, but it's been a little bit of a struggle for him and for Wyatt Langford, who we've talked ad nauseum about Wyatt Langford having just the most strikes outside the strike zone called against him, but he's also had some issues with, choosing the right pitches to be aggressive on. He's got great bat speed. He's got a short bat swing. I talked about that on yesterday's show of why that shows that he can be a guy who will perform well and why scouts like him so much, but it was a struggle for him. And he's been out since that series in Kansas City where he strained his hamstring. Hopefully he's coming back at some point soon. The thought is June, but we'll know a little bit more probably after this weekend when we hear more from the Rangers about how he's progressing. But so far, he's got a 588 OPS. I mean, his slugging percentage and his on-base are both below 300. That's not what was expected of Wyatt Langford, and that's not what he expected of himself. Thankfully, he finally got that first home run out of the way before he went on the IL, so he doesn't have to worry about that when he comes back. He'd probably like to hit one actually into the seats as opposed to just inside the Parker, but it still counts. But these rookies have not quite been what the Rangers expected. But still, that leaves this team in a weird place so far. Coming up, we're going to look at that weird place and what to make of where these Rangers are after 45 games, right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Tonight, we've got the Dallas Stars in their Game 6 against the Colorado Avalanche, if you're betting on them to go in and win another championship for DFW, or the Mavs, who have a chance to advance to the Western Conference Finals tomorrow night against the Thunder. You can bet on them as well, or if you're betting on the Rangers to take home another championship this year, you can check out all those odds on FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Now, here we are 45 games into the season. The Rangers are just one game above 500, I should say. A game and a half behind the Mariners. And it feels like this season has gone worse than it actually has. Because there have been so many downturns, so many injuries, just this last losing streak, I think, really just left a sour taste in the mouth of having a 5-game losing streak that includes a sweep at the hands of the Rockies after pitching incredibly well in Coors Field and just the offense not hitting for 3 games. It felt stinky. And then you go back home, and then you lose on Monday night in an absolute stinker that the bullpen blew because the offense couldn't get anything going again. And then you throw out Jack Leiter, you have Corey Seager ring night, the roof is open, you're wearing the gold uniforms, everything feels great on Tuesday, and then Leiter gets lit up into oblivion, and the team tries to come back but just can't really scrap out of that hole they dug themselves into. Thankfully, they didn't end that series on a loss. Thankfully, they got a great start from John Gray. They got great performances from the back end bullpen and snapped that losing streak to get back above 500 and not fall below it for the first time in Bruce Bochy's era. But it still feels like so far an incredibly frustrating season. Now, let's just kind of look at the big picture. If you had told me 45 games into the season, the Rangers would have injuries to Nathan Eovaldi, Cody Bradford, and Dane Dunning. They still hadn't got anything out of Scherzer, Mahle, and DeGrom. They also had Josh Young, who looked incredible for the first 4 games this season, go on the IL for a 2-month stretch, I would have told you that there's no way that... And also, Corey Seager hasn't really looked like himself. I would have told you, yeah, no, this team is absolutely going to be, well below 500 and in danger of finding themselves out of the playoff chase entirely by the time the calendar turns to June, or by the time we even get to Labor Day or Memorial Day, whichever one is the one in May. But that hasn't been the case. And it hasn't been the case because no one in the AL West has really risen above the pack. The Mariners were about exactly what I thought they would be, but a little bit worse, actually. The pitching has been, well, pretty much one of the best units in baseball, starting and bullpen, just absolutely incredible pitchers. But their offense has been hot, dookie garbage. It has been the offensive equivalent of the Rangers bullpen last year. That's how bad their offense has been. I mean, it's not just been, one guy. Their entire offense has been pretty terrible. But they're still better than the Rangers right now. And their expected wins and loss record is still better than what the Rangers are at this moment. I mean, their offense has been carried by a lot of Josh Rojas, of all people, and Cal Raleigh, which is not, if you're a Mariners fan, not exactly what you were hoping to get out of your offense. It was supposed to be much, much better than that. But the Astros have also had an insane rash of injuries this year in terms of their pitching staff. I mean, they are really counting on Ronel Blanco, who is suspended for 10 games because his glove was incredibly sticky. According to the umpires that checked it, it was the stickiest they've ever seen on one of these glove checks. And he's their WAR leader by far in terms of pitchers. They haven't gotten that much out of Framber Valdez this year as much as they wanted. Hunter Brown has been an absolute atrocity. Spencer Arrighetti has been terrible for them in 6 starts. And the back end of their bullpen was absolutely horrendous for the first month of the season. Now, Hader's finally got his ERA below 5. Abreu's got his below 4. But still, they have had an incredible rash of injuries to their starting pitchers. And they have not suffered it nearly as well as the Rangers have. They're still, I believe, 4 games below the Rangers at this point. They're 19-25. But they have not handled it nearly as well. And with this long run they've got without an off day, longer than the Rangers have, and with 10 games of their ace, yeah, that's right, Ronel Blanco, their ace on the shelf, it's going to put them in an even rougher situation. So just looking at the big picture where this team is, and the offense has been inconsistent, but they're still leading the league, or at least they were as of Sunday, leading the American League in runs scored per game. They're doing incredibly well hitting in clutch situations. They haven't really hit for power yet, but they're starting to, we're seeing this week. Corey Seager has not been himself. We've seen a big slump from Adolis Garcia that he seems to be breaking out of. And Marcus Semien has been, well, about exactly what we expected. So you take that, with the offense hasn't really clicked yet. They're still playing defense overall pretty well. The back end of the bullpen is solid. No bullpen's going to be perfect, but it's been very good. The rotation has been way better than expected and had to be way deeper than anybody could have really predicted at the beginning of this year. And this team has a lot of reinforcements coming. They haven't gotten much out of Evan Carter or Wyatt Langford yet. Corey Seager is still finding his footing. And this team is above 500. Just sit on that for just a second and realize that's where you hoped they would be. They are doing the job. There is such thing as a World Series hangover, and it's real. And clearly, the Rangers are deeply feeling the effects of that, especially on the injury front. Actually, just mainly on the injury front. Not this team is chillaxing because they won a ring and job done. No, that's not the mentality. It's been the incredible rash of injuries of having to play a month longer than most of the league. It takes its toll, and the Rangers are definitely feeling it. But they're surviving. And at times, they are even thriving. So just taking a step back, breathing in, breathing out, touching some grass, and remembering that, just because the Rangers get shut out in a game doesn't mean they need to fire Donnie Ecker and the hitting staff. The hitting staff is fine. Just because the Rangers make it confusing and frustrating and probably not great trade for Robbie Grossman doesn't mean that Chris Young needs to be fired either. Just because Bruce Bochy puts a reliever in that poops the bed in a close situation does not mean that Bruce Bochy needs to be fired or that so-and-so needs to be sent to AAA because they're not working hard enough or whatever nonsense is going on. Just taking that step back, looking at the bigger picture and realizing that this team isn't in as bad of a place as it feels despite just having a 5-game losing streak, just remembering that can be very, very helpful. And it doesn't mean that this team is guaranteed to make the postseason. It doesn't mean this team is going to win 100 games. It doesn't mean they're even going to win, if they make the postseason, they're going to win the World Series again, let alone even a postseason game. They might make it and then get swept out by somebody. It happens. But just remembering that this team is in a good space. By the way, right now they have 35.9% chance to make the postseason, according to Baseball Reference, which I think is a smidge low, given what this team's done so far this season. But also, you could definitely see a scenario where this team does miss out on the playoffs, where they do start to bottom out. But I don't think that's going to happen with this team. They're just too resilient. They've shown too great a capacity to come back from the slings and arrows that they've suffered. They have suffered so much setback and disappointment and heartbreak at times. Basically all last year, in the month of August, there was just the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. Even in that ALCS, there was the highest of highs and the lowest of lows that this team went through. And they came out the other side champions. And they are still the reigning champions. I wish they got to wear those reigning champion gold uniforms a little bit more, maybe even every day, but I digress. They are still champs. They've taken a lot of blows this season. Not everything has broken their way, but they have still found ways to do the dang job and win more baseball games than they lose. And I think they're going to continue to do that, and they are only getting better. So just taking that step back, taking a breath, hopefully kicking the crap out of the Angels. That would make me feel a lot better heading into next week where they're about to take on the Phillies, who are right now the best team in baseball. It would make me feel a whole lot better if they took care of business against their old friend Ron Washington this weekend, because this team, once you look at it, they're not nearly as bad as they have felt at times this week. That's going to do it for this week's shows. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.